the time of this taping, the DA in California has asked for resentencing or ordered for resentencing of the Menendez brothers and the murder of their parents, Kitty and Jose Menendez. Let's get into it. So the first thing I like to do, and some of you already know, is I like to go into what was happening in the world at the time, and particularly in 1989, that summer when the murders were committed. And it was a very troubling time in the world as all eyes were on China. We were looking at they called it the Tiananmen Square massacre. And this was in Beijing. And the students were protesting and wanted freedom. And there was about 3,000, maybe more of them. And they were there for 1 month, 2 weeks, and 6 days protesting. And the Chinese government absolutely wanted them out and wanted to squelch this resistance. So they sent in army and tanks, and they literally massacred thousands of people. Thousands of students were absolutely gunned down by tanks and soldiers. And there's a famous picture of a man standing in front of tanks as they were coming. And it's this way of seeing the world, of that idea of standing up to what was wrong. And this man ultimately died. The reason I'm telling you this is because all eyes in the world were on this particular time. And me being maybe old enough to remember, I remember how everyone was talking about it. And that was really when, as Americans, we started seeing China and communism as a horrifying thing, because this was a time when we looked at the world and we went, that's not right. You don't, because we had a, right to protest, right to speak our minds, free speech. China didn't, and they wanted it, and they didn't get it. So I wanted to go through a couple things that happened in 1989. I guess it was a year or two before. The American president was Ronald Reagan, and he got up in a famous speech, and he said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." And it was a pronouncement that really reverberated around the world, because right after World War II began the Cold War. And what happened was that literally there was a wall built in Berlin. Half of Berlin was freedom, and the other half was communist. So you had these two cities, and there were many, many family members that were cut off from each other. They didn't connect in many, many, many years. So when the wall was torn down and people were able to come through, it was a monumental time, because it said, we're going to end communism. Well, it basically, unbeknownst to many, and particularly the Russian government, it really was the time where Russia started to disintegrate. It no longer had that. At the time, a lot of the territories started to go away. Now, why am I telling you this? Because that time in our country, we just come through Vietnam. We had just gotten through, if you think about it, I mean, the draft stopped in 1972. That was a tremendous amount of protests that were going on. And all during the time that we were dealing with things in other countries, all of a sudden we heard about these two boys. Now, if you think about it, being born in, I want to say it was 1970, around that time, and being children of the 70s, there were love-ins. It really wasn't a focus on incest and family dynamics like that. We knew that there were things happening, but it was more like we actually didn't believe it and didn't want to believe these things were going on. So at the time that the murders of Jose and his wife happened, I should have said unalive, but at the time that this happened, the world was not really ready for children being abused. And I wrote some notes down because this was very interesting to me that social workers at the time were not properly, I want to say, trained to handle sexual abuse. And in fact, there was very little policy, if any. There was almost no policy at all for handling sexual abuse cases. And there were, I think it was in Ohio, that there were 100 pediatricians and social workers who got together and pulled children out of these homes where there was alleged sexual abuse. Now, the people kind of rose up and said, this is over an overreach. These people are overzealous. And so a lot of the kids, what happened during that time is they said, unless children are being physically abused and they are in danger of their life, like serious physical, you could see it kind of thing, then they couldn't do anything. Their hands were tied. And so we can look at this, and I'm just looking at my notes. We can look at this as a time period where there was no legislation really. And in fact, we just looked at someone's acts and we didn't have extenuating circumstances. There wasn't something where it was like, oh, well, these kids really, they didn't mean to, oops, because they were in the eyes of the law. They were these two boys that came in using, very powerful, I want to say, SHOT, shot, and really just that night just let loose on their parents. And I alluded to this in the prior video I did, but one of the things I want to say to you is that there were attempts on their life, they believed. And in fact, when we look back on it, we can say, I believe that there were attempts on the brothers' lives. The parents were really trying to, now this is my opinion, I think they had to silence the boys because there was that kind of idea of, if they talk, we're screwed, so to speak. And the other thing that has happened in present day right now is that there, I want to say it was one of the boys from Menudo. He came forward and said that Jose had abused him. And that started to lend more credence to the boy's story. Also, there were many more. In those days, it was much easier to test females. And they did have a test, and it was called reflex anal dilation. And it was something that they could test, but it wasn't really used on boys. Now, as we look at this case now, the thing to remember is, no one condones killing in any way, shape, or form. But what we're seeing now is the time period of, they've done their time. We've seen, and you guys know what I'm talking about. Gosh, my eyes are bothering me today. We've seen in this time period that we're in, we've seen people who unalive people brutally are walking back out on the street. We're seeing the idea of people who commit crimes going free. So to see that these boys served 35 years already and are actually exemplary prisoners, and not only that, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment, their family flew out to Los Angeles, I think it was yesterday when it took place, from the time of this taping, to say they need to come home. And this is their own family. This is Kitty's sister, their cousins. So when you look at that, you know that the family was on their side. And the family all along said, no, this was going on. But there was a first trial. And I think that was when the boys were separated, but there was a hung jury and another one. The point is they had 3 trials. And third was the charm, because they had a DA who said, no, you can't bring in sexual abuse. So what happens? It wasn't brought in. And when you look at it that way, no, they had no chance of anything good happening for them, meaning rehabilitation, help, assistance. And I look at their records now and I can say in 35 years, and they had some former prisoners talking on television and interviewing them. And one guy said it was because of them that I found hope. And what they did was they had a mural project, and then they started a green spaces project. And these brothers were very respected for the work they did with other inmates. One of them was going to get a master's. The other, had finished college. I think that was Lyle. And the thing to look at when you're looking at someone who has committed any kind of crime, you have to look at the extenuating circumstances too. You have to look at, their behavior up to it and after it. I really think that this resentencing, in my opinion, is a right. It is making something go right. And what I mean by that is boys and men get abused too. And I because in those days it was like boys can't be abused, sexually, they can't be abused because they'd have to partner. But that wasn't what was going on. And when you have a parent who is abusing you, what are you going to do? You're trapped. So I want to say that I know some of you don't believe that or have a hard time thinking about it this way, but there are so many people that commit horrible, horrible crimes. And, we've seen them get 10-year sentences or 20-year sentences or a manslaughter charge, and depending upon the state, of course. But the time period of when this took place, when we look at the things that were going on, they were so big in the world, we really weren't focusing on what was happening here in America. We weren't able to really see that the abuse that was going on of children, there were no set laws for it. We didn't have protocols, and there were social workers fighting for these kids. So I want to say that there are a lot of programs now. One of them in particular, and gosh, I'm going to post it down below, but it is a program that I think is fantastic, and I'm going to volunteer here, is the Ad Litem, something Ad Litem. Basically what it is that, when you have the family abuse and stuff, what happens, excuse me, and things, stuff, whatever, sorry. When family abuse happens and the courts get involved, well, you've got one side that is the social worker, and you've got the other side that's the court, right? And so the person who is like I forget ad infinitum, but they're the person that stands up for the children or the child. So what happens, like a civilian, like myself, or perhaps you, we get assigned a case and we talk to the children, and we then go to the court and go to the social worker as a non-professional, but give them our insights into the children and give suggestions. That doesn't mean they're going to follow them. That just means that we are a part of standing up. We're a voice for the children. And so we're looking at programs today that the Menendez brothers didn't have. And so I really encourage all of you to really look at when people have done their time. And one of the things the DA said, and I thought this was interesting, is that they have been rehabilitated. And that's not something that happens much in our prison systems. People don't get those advantages. And many of the inmates that worked with the Menendez brothers in prison on the mural project and the painting, and so many of the inmates were like, I had nowhere to go. I was just like, I didn't have meaning until I did this mural project. And they were painting and designing it. And one of the brothers went into, I think it's landscape design. So there's so much that these boys did. And I really want to underline the idea that, can we have that idea of forgiveness in our heart? Can we look at people and recognize that they have grown and changed? They're not the same people that they were years ago. And, these are now middle-aged men. And They have done so much good inside. It only makes me wonder the good they can do on the outside and the help and support they will give to people that we may never meet. So if you like what I'm talking about, if you like the content, please like and subscribe. The likes do help the algorithm, and I am going to look to do more. I'm really enjoying coming back to this again and talking to all of you. And I think one of the biggest things I want to underline is it's so important that we not be so definite about this person's this or this person's that. We have to look at the totality of the circumstances and not just they did this, so they're bad and that's it. And I think that's what we need to move toward. I think we need to go, why do you like this person? Why do you feel that way? And literally create that inquiry where we can be open and maybe have a new idea about our world, about what's going on. The more fixed we are, the more trouble we're in. So please remember in the comments, I do invite your comments. I love to comment on your comments, but please remember, say what you mean what you say, but don't say it mean. I really don't think it's beneficial to call someone names or bully them. But if there's something you have to say, an opinion, we want to hear it. All right. Thank you for all this. I'm like itchy. And thank you for all this. I will see you guys on the next one.